Welcome back, everyone, to day 3 of Leading Transformational Change. I'm Brooke Stara. I'll be moderating the presentation today for Sam. I am a fellow change practitioner and executive coach. I'm calling in from Los Angeles, California today. I'd now like to introduce our presenter today, Sam Wasserman. Samantha is an experienced leadership advisory consultant, and she has successfully advised and coached leaders, teams, and organizations as their businesses grow and transform for over 30 years. She possesses a deep hands-on experience in developing talent pipelines for organizational growth. She is an expert in all things succession. She designs and delivers leadership offsites centered on strategy, culture, and change. And she is also, if that's not enough, a certified executive and team coach. All of these experiences allow her to bring a unique, holistic lens to how leadership growth impacts business growth, culture, innovation, and change. Sam started her career in labor and employment law at Pillsbury in San Francisco. Then she branched out into the technology space by working for a boutique IT consulting firm specializing in enterprise level change. She received her master's degree and lived in several countries abroad, and has worked in both the people, pay, and performance side and effectiveness practices in Aon Hewitt and Willis Towers Watson. I now want to turn it over to Sam to begin her presentation. Sam.
Thank you, Brooks. I really appreciate the introduction, and I also really appreciate you moderating today. I like to have a dialogue, so I hope that we get a lot of questions, and I appreciate you facilitating those questions. I also just want to thank the C4C community. I want to thank Ian, and I want to definitely extend my appreciation to Stelios and the One Business World community as well. I am appreciative to be here today. Brooks, hopefully you can sort of keep track of this, but I'm always interested of why people are interested in the topics I'm talking about. So today, I chose sort of a broader topic, so we're hoping to keep it narrow to empowerment culture. What brought you here today? What are you interested in? And specifically, what interests you about the topic of creating empowerment cultures? It's a particular passion of mine. I'm from the Midwest. My original career path was going to be a labor and employment attorney. I really care about workers and the sense of empowerment they have. And I know the research supports and my own work supports the fact that when you empower employees, it drives business results. It really does work. So that is my passion, and I hope that you all are interested, even more interested, in all the levers that we can pull and work with to make that happen for people. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is where organizations typically start. So when they're looking to go through change, when they know that they need to have a business turnaround, when they're looking to go digital, when they're looking to employ AI more strategically, companies tend to think about what they want to do on an organizational level. That's typically where it starts. What's the strategy? What's the plan? We need to move into a new market. So what I'd like to do is offer, first of all, a framework and a series of lenses of how to think about this. So when typically I go into an organization to help advise or get a chunk of work to help organizations think about how they're going to approach change and culture, they're thinking on an organizational level, which makes sense. One of the ways in which I help organizations, and I would encourage organizations to think about it, is to back up a little bit, expand that lens, and think about culture in society and what's going on a societal level. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean in a minute. Typically, organizations are thinking sort of in that moderate lens, and then they go on to say, okay, this is the plan, here's our strategy, here's the change. We want to implements certain initiatives. It's going to be a multi-year plan. And then they go on to doing leadership development, training, coaching for their people. And that's what I refer to when I'm speaking about sort of the leadership lens. How do we get our leaders to lead this effort, lead this change? Culture tends to go through leadership as a medium through which we try to instill values, behaviors, things like that. But I encourage companies to look, sort of open up that lens before they go down that path and look at things on a more societal level. So what do I mean by that? Let me ask a couple of questions. And again, Brooke, if you wouldn't mind keeping track of the chat. Think about this year. Think about this year, what's really gone on. Look at some of these images. Again, I'm trying to pull this down into empowerment, but just these images alone, right? We had, this was the year of the strike, I think, declared by many media outlets. We had the airlines, we had Amazon, we had healthcare, very, very meaningful strikes, at least from my perspective. Kaiser Permanente, huge in California, where Brooks and I are based. Other healthcare strikes going on, post-pandemic world, United Auto Workers, the Writers Guild, part of what they were looking at, and the Actors Guild, what they were looking at is this fear around AI and what they will be doing with images, and will they be taking jobs. So there's a lot of fear out there. So I'm probably leaving out a lot of workers, frontline workers, that that have been impacted in some way recently by labor practices or employment practices where they feel like they've been left behind and they're not able to do their jobs effectively, right? So my question for you is, before undergoing cultural change, are organizations looking at this to kind of say, what indicators can we look at to avoid or to think about how we need to shape our cultures in the future? What can we take from this to sort of pay it forward and think about, what do people need, right? So I'd like to just get some audience input in the chat about thoughts about this. Is this something you think that organizations think about? Do you think they should think about? Things like that, right? So I just wanted to throw up a recent study by Harvard. Why should employees focus specifically on empowerment and building that into their cultures? Well, this one focused specifically on frontline workers, and so what all of those employee groups in the past slide we just saw had in common is they're frontline workers. There's a lot of literature and a lot of studies out there that have been published since the 70s and 80s, that because these frontline workers are closest to the customers, and I can speak to this, I worked at Gap Corporations, where really the store employees were often the ones that were most forgotten about, but yet they were the ones that were really there to promote the brand. They gave the customer experience. So I can really relate to this. They're the first point of contact, and a lot of times they're the people that can drive the results for the business. So all of these frontline workers really need that investment. And in this study, there was over 200 executives that were interviewed for this. And they said that managers really drive empowerment for employees. 91% said that they can really drive business results through those managers, yet only half of them said that they were really themselves empowered to do that. So we know for a fact that empowering employees can really drive business results. Brooks, did we have any thoughts or questions? Maybe we could just take one before we move on.
Yes, I do. I do have a question for you. So Yes, we have seen the headlines this year. Monumental year for strikes, especially for the frontline workers. So, when we are talking about creating an empowered culture, are we typically only speaking to the specific needs of frontline employee groups versus
Mm.
others?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. No, we're not. So one of the things that has that's evolved over time with with empowerment and culture and transformation, one of the tools that has been used probably most predominantly is the engagement survey. And I'll be getting into that in a second, but that sort of begs the question, well, how do we define engagement? How do we define empowerment? Which one is more powerful? What should we be paying attention to? So when we work with clients, one of the things that we do is we really try to define empowerment up front and distinguish it from engagement. That's one of the things that becomes very important. So how do we define and measure empowerment? One of the things, and this is all supported through literature, which I'm happy to provide studies if people are interested, autonomy. Do they have the autonomy over their work? And this really came out in the pandemic. Some of these needs that employees have really came out in terms of after the pandemic, people got used to the autonomy that they had, and then they didn't want to give that up when they came back to work. Authority. Do they have authority over how they execute their work and how they do their work? Do they have managers and leaderships that are too authoritarian with them? Access to data and information transparency. So this is digging a little bit deeper than any engagement survey or instrument usually does. So it's interesting how much reception we get back that having access to the right data in real time and having transparent information being given to employees to help them make decisions that they're accountable for, how much that truly empowers employees. Resources, being given the right resources and enough of them to perform and even master themselves in their roles. Opportunities for growth is a huge factor for empowerment. Some of the other ones are trust with the manager, which also directly impacts engagement, as well as some of the things that you just saw that people were striking for. People want to know that they're paid appropriately, and that their health and their safety is taken into consideration. So some of these things aren't normally covered in an engagement survey. So this is why we want to include and really specify and distinguish empowerment. So thank you for the question. So now I wanted to move into the organizational lens. So moving a bit away from societal and saying, okay, well, how can we use that information to inform what we're doing? Well, one of the things that I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how we use engagement surveys. Engagement surveys have been popularized since the 1990s. So in the late 90s, I got out of graduate school and I worked for Hewitt, which is now part of Aon. And then I went on to work for Towers Perrin, which is now part of WTW. So we ran so many engagement surveys, and what we did with those surveys is help employers attract and retain talent by being one of the best employers. So it really, people really wanted to get on the top 100 list. So these were they were tools that were used very specifically for reasons of being public about what great employers different companies were to compete for talent, and to build culture and pay practices, right? So to really understand and get the word out there to be competitive in the market. Since that time, the market has exploded, and what engagement surveys have done, and engagement providers and service providers have done, is really expand the market to engagement services. And engagement has really become popularized, and I think it's good, but you've got all of these companies, and this is just a smattering. Gallup is probably the biggest now, but what what I find in most engagement surveys, they're run every couple of years or every year, and companies invest a lot of time and a lot of energy. And what many of them will say, my clients and just other clients of some of these companies will say, they try to do too much. They gather so much information that companies will go out and try to do so much with the initiatives, because they're gathering so much data that it kind of dilutes the impact. So if you want to specifically focus on a couple of things, including empowerment, you really want to get the right data so that it can guide you in the right direction, right? So clarify and distinguish engagement from empowerment. That's probably the first step and the first practice that I recommend for clients that it's kind of murky when they don't know the difference. So it's defined in so many ways. I've just included a couple of ways that these different surveys define engagement. But at the end of the day, engagement is basically the beliefs and the feelings that employees have towards the place that they work. Empowerment is a little bit more from the employee's lens. Do they have what they need to perform their role well? Do they have the right information? Do they have authority over their decisions? Do they feel like they're set up to succeed, right? So that's what really drives the job satisfaction, success for themselves. Do they have options to grow? And what it is uniquely about is the degree of thought and investments that employees and the roles that they have enhance their contribution and impact to the organization. That is how we define it, and that's how we really clearly articulate that to companies and how they distinguish. And it does get really murky. So this is just one more piece of data that was a study, a time-elapsed study by Zenger Folkman, that even if you're looking to drive engagement, empowerment is one of the best tools to do so. So if you invest in your employees to empower them with a sense of empowerment, with all the tools that we have to do that, you're going to also drive engagement. It's one of the biggest factors that can impact that, right? So what's missing in empowerment culture? Even with all of these efforts, there's still a couple of things that fall through the cracks. Rewards and recognition. It's interesting with how much focus is given to pay practices, pay equity. Appreciation, when we do the studies, appreciation is always ranked higher than the actual pay package. So when companies, once people get hired and they're looking to feel empowered, appreciation is ranked more highly than how people are paid, which we always find to be interesting. Now, this is really interesting, and I have the study for anyone who's interested. I'm happy to send people the link afterwards. Pay transparency is actually an empowering factor for men, but it actually has the reverse impact for women. So that was a recent Harvard study done just within the year. So companies are still having a hard time reconciling transparency because women are still paid less for the same roles, oftentimes with higher credentials. So we can get into that. That could be a whole topic unto itself. And one of the things that we also look at and this is when I go into organizations and I'm coaching leaders and I'm working with teams, one of the things that we have found to be the most effective at driving empowerment is being able to speak to something that I call work worth. And what that means is, as long as people feel valued, and how we are able to measure that is whether or not their managers can articulate very clearly how the employees' work makes a difference in the strategy, in the outcomes of the business, and whether or not that team, that group, that division is successful. These are very simple things, and I know it sounds very anecdotal, but my point is, there's a lot of money invested in these much larger surveys. And if you want to drive empowerment, a lot of these solutions are very, very simple. And it's just a means of being able to articulate to people how their work is valued and worth in the organization, because they just want to know that they make a difference. That can oftentimes just be what's really the empowerment drivers. So that's sort of the organizational lens, and distilling it down to what leaders can do. I have two more suggestions. How are we doing on time? Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. So these two things I think are important to leave people with, especially if you're leaders or you're a coach and you work with leaders. Communicating the practice and language of work worth. So a couple things that we do. We examine the information flow. So when we're working with teams, a lot of times what we find is people on teams and within certain groups aren't empowered because the information flow isn't getting to them. So it's what I had said earlier. There might be functional barriers. People just don't know how to communicate. They don't know the interdependencies. So we really look at how communication is flowing, if there's bottlenecks and transmission failure points. We run our own private surveys. I have an operations lead, Courtney. She helps me design those surveys when we're just not getting enough information about what's truly a disempowering factor for people. So then the leader of the teams is we help that leader speak to connecting the dots between each and every role and the contribution that role makes to the business strategy and the outcome. So again, I call that work worth, just so that leaders can remember it and really understand how they can get better at it. So emanate that language, develop a language of work worth, and emanate it, speak it, teach it, reiterate it frequently throughout the organizations. So I'm not the first person to realize this. There's a gentleman by the name of Daniel Pink. He wrote a book called Drive, and he pointed this out quite some time ago when he wrote his book. It's all about clarifying the strategic direction, making it clear why each and every employee, why you matter, right? Clarifying the values for alignment and the change, giving employees, you have a choice. These are the values. These are what we're working towards. Clarify strategic priorities within that larger strategy. And here's why you matter and your work matters. And clarify those indicators of how you're doing and why those indicators and your work impacts the big picture. And this is why your role is important. And open that door of two-way communication so that people can come in and ask questions. So that's really the leader's role in terms of speaking the language of work worth. The last thing I want to touch on, and this is probably something that it's not something that I didn't know until recently, also in the news, reframe DEI as a continuous business discipline that leaders can embed in the business. So DEI efforts have slowed, stalled, and failed recently simply because there's been a lot of employee fatigue around the topic. It doesn't mean that this isn't an empowering aspect in culture. So there's a lot of people that depend on these programs. There's a lot of people, especially in the pay practices, as I just mentioned. I think that these groups and these centers of excellence were created with the best of intentions. But what happened is they kind of were isolated in their own corners of the business, and they really didn't get fully integrated, and they really didn't get the full support. So what we see is a lot of organizations either laying these people off, or just these people leaving by their own volition because they don't feel supported internally. There was a book written about it, and there's a lot of media coverage about the different companies, Amazon, Disney. A lot of them have sort of let that staff go. So reframing DEI for what it is, it's a business driver. It's necessary for innovation. Cognitive diverse teams, cognitively diverse teams always perform better, to the tune of 33% increases in profitability. We know this. Especially for Gen Z, They're talent attraction magnets for companies. Oftentimes, the younger people do not want to work for places that are not both gender diverse as well as ethnically diverse. And it increases psychological safety, right? So, which also drives business results and contributes to innovation. So I know that this is a lot of information, but I'm very, very passionate that companies continue to prioritize empowerment, DEI, all of these tools that I mentioned, all of these concepts that I mentioned are big drivers for empowered cultures and creating empowered cultures for change. And it keeps the employees top of mind. So with that, I'm going to pause and allow Brooks to field some questions to me or some thoughts that the audience has.
Great, Sam. So we do have a question from Faye. And Faye said, as a change consultant, often in one contract for less than a year, she is wondering what she could focus on to empower and support staff when C-suite stakeholders do not see that there is a need for change in the culture.
In a one-year contract.
Kind of a shorter term project.
Yeah. So what I do, and this kind of depends on your relationship. So this kind of depends on your relationships with your clients. I love having, and this isn't my relationship with all my clients, but I love having relationships with HR business partners, the L&D team often, and I'll ask them, can you share, if I'm coaching a leader, or if I'm working with a team, could you share the latest engagement survey findings? And I'll have them go, and I've worked with engagement surveys often, both internally and externally. So I'll have them sit down with me in a session and review it. And within those engagement survey findings, you can find areas that need improvement. Right? So that it's hidden. So if I didn't articulate it clearly earlier, you can find what's missing in those data points, right? So oftentimes, part of the reason why I wanted to have this discussion today is empowerment the lines get blurred, and it's something that has been buried over these other items around engagement. And then you see what's happening in society and you think, okay, these people aren't picketing, these people aren't striking because they want a free lunch, and they want, to be more excited about going to work and engaged in what they're doing. They're doing it because of unfair practices, and they don't feel like they can support their families, or, these are needs that they have, they're striking about. This is real fear, and that's more of an empowerment thing. So I think all I'm saying is that the indicators are there. You just have to point it out to them, either with data or widening that lens for them.
Great. Thank you, Faye, for your question. One last question. When you are coaching executives or teams, what are you hearing from them? What are they struggling with the most around these concepts of empowerment and engagement?
It's funny. I think a lot of them, because I work in the STEM space, which is largely the scientific, I work a lot in healthcare, I work a lot in technology, a lot of innovation fields. I think this is a sort of a classic challenge where you have experts moving up into leadership roles. I think there's a lot of movement in the leadership pipeline, so to speak. So those leaders aren't as well prepared to take on leadership roles, which are less about doing and knowing and more about listening and enabling and empowering, and they don't have those skills. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is that more not being, when I'm coaching them, they need to get past that I know the answer, and to develop that skill set of listening and doing just what we talked about today, which is how do I empower these people? Because the people closest to the problems, whether it's at a manufacturing site, whether you're at a hospital, whether you're putting together the next Mars rover, the people closest to the problems are the people that have the ideas. And those people are the ones that need to be empowered and feel safe to talk about those things. So a lot of my work when I'm coaching is about helping those people scale back their advice monster, so to speak, right? And their all-knowing scientific and technical knowledge.
That's great. Advice monster. I'm going to use that. All right. I think we're just about at time. So if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make as we wrap up here?
Yeah, so I mentioned a lot of studies. I am kind of a data geek in that way. If anybody was interested in any of the studies that I mentioned, I'm more than happy to send them along. Just go ahead and put your email in chat, and Brooks and I will make sure that we capture that and get back to you and send you any information that you might want. Thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it.